Hi, welcome to Supper with Stella. Today we're going to be making a caprese pasta. So much like the caprese salad, which is layered tomatoes, mozzarella, and basil, we are going to be turning it into a pasta dish. So I've got a half pound of spaghetti noodles cooking on the stove behind me. I'm just going to cook them till they're al dente, and I'm going to save a cup of the pasta water in case I need it. So always pull a cup of your water off before you drain your pasta. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. So that'll be the base of it. I've got some homegrown little cherry tomatoes here that we're going to be using. So we're going to roast up tomatoes with garlic. We're going to add a little mozzarella into it, and we're going to top everything with a nice little crunchy breadcrumb topping and some fresh basil. So it's got all the elements of a caprese salad, but in a pasta form. So as I said, I've already got my spaghetti cooking. I've got 2 tablespoons of butter melting up over here. Once it's melted, I'm going to add some panko breadcrumbs to it. So a lot of times I use my homemade breadcrumbs. But since this is just the finishing top on a little pasta, I want it to be really pretty. It's very simple pasta, not a lot happening in it. So I really want my breadcrumbs to be as pretty as they can. And the panko are prettier than my homemade ones. So I will be using panko today, but you use what you want to use with it. As far as a topping for a pasta dish, I really like the texture and the look, but I really do like the texture of panko breadcrumbs, which is why I'm choosing to use that today over my homemade ones. So I'm going to start with my cherry tomatoes. So these, I'm just going to give, so they're pretty large. They're a little bit smaller than like a golf ball. I am going to slice them in half. If they were a smaller, more kind of standard cherry or like grape-sized tomato, I would just leave them whole. But just because these are a little bigger, I am going to help out the roasting by just going ahead and slicing them in half. And these are what's out of my garden. They are all, I've got 3 varieties that are pretty interchangeable. The large red cherry, the Chadwick cherry, and the Tommy Toes. And so these are a mixture of those. Once they come off the tomato plant, I cannot tell the difference in either look or taste. But all 3 of those varieties grow a little bit bigger than kind of that standard cherry size you see in the store. Okay, so my butter is melted up, and I've just got it over medium low. I'm not going to measure, but I'm going to sprinkle in about half a cup of breadcrumbs. And just go ahead and get them tossed in the butter. And I prefer to use butter here. And you could use olive oil. I prefer butter. I like the flavor, and definitely the smell of the cooking butter as it toasts up the breadcrumbs. Olive oil would still toast them up, but I like the flavor that the butter is gonna add. So I'm just going to zip through the rest of these tomatoes, and then I'm going to go ahead and let's see, I need 6 cloves of garlic. So I'm going to go ahead and they're just smashed. So I'm going to go ahead and get my garlic peeled and smashed, and then we'll move on from there. right, so a few of those cloves the smaller ones got smashed when I went to peel them. These others did not, so I'm just gonna give, these larger ones, so I'm just gonna give them a couple of whacks. Okay, let me clear up a little room. So what I'm gonna do is just coat this thoroughly in olive oil. So the olive oil we're using, we're not just cooking with it. It's not just an element of cooking. It is a part of the sauce, okay? We're not just using it so that this doesn't all stick to the pan. It is an actual part of the sauce. So I am gonna use a fair amount. I'm gonna use somewhere in the nature of about a half to maybe even a third cup of olive oil, okay? So don't be alarmed when I just keep pouring and pouring, because you do really want a good bit of olive oil in the sauce. Think that's good. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and salt and pepper everything. And then I am gonna roast these honestly, till they are, if I hadn't cut them in half, I'd say till they were starting to pop, but since they were larger and I went ahead and cut them in half, I'm gonna roast them for 20, 30 minutes, really until they're just the consistency I want, which is they still hold a little bit of their shape, but they are breaking down as well, breaking down into a sauce. So a good bit of salt and pepper, and then just with my hands, mix it all up. And the garlic will still be in some pretty big chunks, but once I get it into the pasta and begin making the sauce, it is gonna break down a fair amount. So, spread them out. I'm not using the biggest baking sheet that I could, but I kind of have a small oven, so I have to be careful with my baking sheets. So get as thin of a layer as you can. Not gonna be able to get them all in one layer. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and pop this in the oven. And this would be a good time. I already had started my pasta, I don't know, I just wasn't really thinking. I'd already started my pasta. This would be when you wanna start your pasta water boiling, when you put this in the oven. So I got a little ahead of myself with a few steps. So I'm gonna get this in the oven, wash up my hands, and we'll continue making the topping. Okay, so right after I got all my breadcrumbs going, I realized that, I don't know, I just got really ahead of myself in making this, and I don't want to start the video over, but I needed to saute a shallot and some garlic in my pan before I added the breadcrumbs. It's not a big deal. I'm just going to get them sauteed up now. The breadcrumbs have come out. They're finished. They're nice and toasted up. I'm just going to saute these in a little olive oil right now. And normally you would want to do that first thing in butter, and then you add your breadcrumbs to that. But it's okay. It's not a big deal that I am doing this a little backwards. And I, of course, could use more butter, to saute these, but the olive oil is sitting right here, and the breadcrumbs are the main reason that I'm using the butter, so that I have some really nice buttery breadcrumbs, which I already do. And I want to do just a very small dice on this. So I'm doing a mince, okay? Pretty small. potent shallot. It is making my eyes very watery. And you really do need the shallot and garlic in the breadcrumb mix. It just really brings like some extra flavor to it. As I said before, there's not a lot happening in this dish. It's just some very, very basic flavors. So I really like to just kind of bring as much flavor to every component as I can. All right, I'm gonna let that melt for just a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and chop my basil. So basil won't be used until the very, very end. I am just gonna garnish with basil. So I'll use it at the end. And then we've got mozzarella, which you can buy the little mozzarella pearls. That they didn't have them at the store, so I just bought a ball of mozzarella and I'm just gonna dice it up. And then just before the tomatoes come out of the oven, I will add the mozzarella so it gets just a little bit melty, but not like super melted. Okay, so my shallots are starting to brown. I am just gonna go ahead and grate 2 cloves of garlic in. And then I want to add just a small amount of salt and pepper. And then really just cook it for 30 seconds to a minute. You definitely don't want the garlic to burn, but I don't want it to be raw either. And it is just, because I grated it, it's just kind of a pulp. And I'm gonna add the breadcrumbs back in and just get it all combined the way it should have happened the first time. Just get it all combined over the heat. Once I get it combined, I do want to get it off the heat or these breadcrumbs will burn. Okay, I'm gonna turn that off, get these off the heat. And then just give them a mix in here just to make sure I got them all mixed up. Okay, so I can set that aside. So breadcrumbs are ready, pasta is ready. Little early, but pasta is ready to go. I'll probably just sprinkle a little olive oil on it or drizzle a little olive oil on it just to keep it from clumping. I need to cut up my mozzarella and I will wait to do that just before I put it in, and my tomatoes are cooking away. So we are well on our way to being done with this, again, very simple pasta, and I will just join you back here when we're a little closer. Okay, so my tomatoes have been in the oven for about 20 minutes. This is what they look like. So to be honest, they're a little bit, because I cut them in half, they're a little bit more cooked than, I don't want to say that I would like, but than they normally are at this point. But I'm normally using a whole cherry tomato, a tomato that is somewhere in the nature of this size, okay? Whereas these were, like I said before, a little bit smaller than like a golf ball. So these were quite, these are on the large end of the cherry tomato spectrum, but I have a ton of them, so it's not gonna look the way it always looks, but it should taste just the same. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my mozzarella diced up. And I want to do a relatively large dice on them. I want nice bite-sized pieces of mozzarella. And this is like a fresh mozzarella. This is one of those really fresh, wobbly ones that melts really beautifully. Okay, so I am just gonna kind of dot these all over. And they are gonna melt down just a little bit. I'm gonna pop this back in my oven, which is on, like I think I said before, it's on 425, pretty high. So I am gonna pop them back in and just give them the chance to begin melting. Okay, so this was in the oven for about 5 more minutes. You can see how that mozzarella has kind of begun to break down. So very, very carefully, pour this into the pasta. Pasta's in this dish. I don't know if you were able to see it. This is kind of heavy though, so I wanna go ahead. All right, so I've got my, let's see. I've got my pasta water, and you can see how it's turned like almost a pale color, right? That's all the starch in it. Now, there's a ton of juice of these tomatoes, so I don't want to add pasta water to this unless I actually need more liquid to it. But whenever I cook pasta, and I'm just stirring this all together, so whenever I cook pasta, I usually take off, this is a 1 cup measuring cup. It's usually, I can get about 3/4 cup dunk in there before I pull it off. So I get some pasta water off, and it is really good as a binder. And I've got a ton of liquid in here, so I don't want to add any more liquid just for the sake of adding liquid. So I pulled this off. I don't need it. It's better to pull it off and not need it than need it, not pull it off, because if you just add wine, water, chicken stock, something like that to it, yes, you're adding more liquid, and if it's wine or chicken stock, or you're adding flavor, but what you're not adding is the starch, which helps kind of bring and emulsify and just like bring everything together. So this is as simple as that, and you can see, I wanted to use this pot so you could kind of watch me do it a little better. Normally I cook my pasta in a larger stock pot, which is why the pasta finished so early. This little 3-quart deep dish skillet holds a lot less water. It only holds 3 quarts of water than a 7-quart stock pot. So that's why my pasta finished cooking, because my water came to a boil so quickly in this, and I just wasn't really accounting for the time. But to serve this up, and I'm gonna have just a little bit for lunch. So to serve this up, and a lot of folks want to do their pasta on their plate and then put the sauce on. But really and again, because my pasta finished cooking a little earlier, this isn't working out quite the way it normally does in my head. But with the pasta being nice and hot, and then you add these very liquidious tomatoes to it, the pasta really absorbs some of that tomato flavor. Now, since I, got all messed up with my time, my pasta isn't going to be, unfortunately, as flavorful as it would normally be. It's still going to taste great, but I always like to, very few times do I not want to add my pasta and my sauce into the same pan together, okay, before I serve it. So just get, and you can see all that long string, that's the cheese right there. All right, so get that, and then get like a good bit with the tomato on it. Spoon would probably be better. And like I said, if you're using a small enough tomato and you don't need to cut it in half, it does work out a little bit better, but it's good. I mean, the taste isn't gonna change. It's just a little easier to pull those tomatoes out. And then I am gonna get, your presentation will be a little better. And remember, I used almost a 1/4 cup, roughly a 1/4 cup of olive oil. And so that is, remember, that is a big part of this sauce, because there's really, as far as this tomato sauce, so far, it is just tomatoes, olive oil, and then the roasted garlic, which at this point has pretty much broken down in it and is just adding some delicious flavor. But we've got a shallot and garlic in our breadcrumbs. So just top it with your breadcrumbs, which gives it a really nice little crunch. And then I just garnish it with a little basil. You're welcome to add some basil into the pot at this point. I just kind of prefer my basil as a garnish on top. And so there it is. Several different components to work with, but fairly easy dish to bring together. And I'm looking forward to eating this. Thanks so much for joining me. Bye.